We're in a sermon series called Ownership. And we've been talking about some of the cost, the commitment. Today we're going to talk about the joy, because I think the last couple weeks have been a little heavy maybe. But as a good teacher does, I should have exams. Some of you are exempt from not being here. But who remembers what the notes were from the first week? We talked about the cost of ownership. Anybody remember what the cost biblically is of ownership, owning our faith? She's telling me. And she's got it right. The rest of you just need to catch on here. I see all blank stares. That's not a good thing. You'll remember this. Remember, Jesus had just sent the disciples out. They had gone out. They'd been healing. They'd been doing miracles. They'd been casting out spirits. They come back and they're exhausted, and Jesus tells them to go and rest. Actually, that was last week. Let's see. I'm skipping into the commitment part. But it talks about the commitment. The commitment is perseverance and rest. But the first part I want to go to is the cost. We talked about doing good. And doing good, Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, remember? And everybody was mad at him because he healed on the Sabbath. It was breaking a law. But we talked about how important it is to do good even though others might not like it. So doing good is a cost. We talked also about serving humbly, even though, sometimes we like a little bit of recognition. Serving humbly is what we're called to do. And then we talked about inviting all, even those who don't look like us, don't sound like us, inviting all, even the people that we would call enemies. Jesus says we're supposed to invite to the table. So the cost of ownership, the cost of being a person of faith and claiming our faith and claiming the church is to do good, to serve humbly, and to invite all. And then last week we talked about this commitment. We talked about the importance of commitment. This is when Jesus sent out the disciples. They came back, they're exhausted, and they're ready to take a break. And Jesus even says, go take a break. But then they can't, because remember, all the people are following them. All the people are excited about the miracles that they'd seen, and they're following them. They don't get a chance to take a break, and they have to persevere. So the commitment, we talked about, the commitment of ownership is persevering even when we feel like things are against us. The odds are against us. People are beating us down, and yet we're called to persevere. And then know also when to rest. To be able to commit to something and see it through to the fullness of it, we have to be able to persevere and rest. Today we're going to talk about the joy of ownership. There's an article I found from 2014, Eagle. It's about the pain and the joy of business ownership. And it says that there's several things that we can identify that are joys of ownership, whether you own your small business or whether you own a large business. Watching some things happen in business ownership bring us joy. And I'm going to talk about those briefly, and then I'm going to relate them to the church. First of all, it feels good to build a team. It feels good to build a team around you and watch the team come together with the same mission statement or vision and say, yes, we're going to live into that. We're going to be Christ in community. We're going to teach ELL classes. We're going to stand beside those who do not have even the basics of language. He says it's particularly rewarding to watch people mature into their positions. People who start out as, Paul might call them baby Christians, and coming into the church and begin to get involved just a little bit, and then watch them grow to take on leadership and authority, responsibility, and take on a task that is theirs. It's a joy. The challenge of achieving the first milestone is exhilarating, isn't it? Achieving those milestones along the way, that how many times do you walk into a business and you see that first dollar posted up in the business, the first dollar that they earned? Because that was a milestone. And each milestone thereafter, whether it's a new item or whether it's a new franchise or whatever it is, it's something to celebrate those milestones as you progress in the mission of the business. He says the responsibility to shareholders, to staff, the success of the company, he says even the responsibility itself is a joy. The limits are our own. Have you ever been in that position where, you hear people say, the sky's the limit? Well, it's true. Especially if you're independent, a business owner, you can say the sky's the limit. We can do anything we want. We can achieve anything we want. We just have to put forth the effort, commit to the cost, and persevere through it. How many of you are competitive? Okay, men, you should just raise your hand. Women, this is your great opportunity. No, women are competitive too. Otherwise, just nudge them really good because they've got their arms up. You know, to be competitive in business, to be competitive in what we do, to give our best to something, to prove that we're going to achieve and accomplish, that's a benefit, a joy of business as well. To be so competitive that you're able to identify those wins along the way. He says creating employment is a benefit of business. Now, in the church, it might look a little different. It might be, creating hope, offering stability, standing beside someone, convincing them, reminding them that they have family in a circumstance, that they don't have to go it alone. That gives employment in essence. It gives a place of belonging. Let me translate this for the church just for a moment. In verse 6, we encounter this passage. It's talking about rejoicing or to have joy. It says, in this you rejoice. It's talking about our salvation. Knowing that in Christ we have salvation. It says, in this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials. Okay, we know that something's coming. We know that salvation is good. We know that this relationship with God brings us joy. And yet we have to endure life and situations. We have to endure the cost, if you want to call it that. The cost of the relationship. There is a cost to joy. There's a cost to ownership. We know there's hard work, suffering, and commitment. This week, you said it was warm weather. Anybody get out and enjoy it? Go for a hike, go for a bike ride, play some disc golf, enjoy. This week I actually got out my new shoes that I'm going to be taking on my renewal leave to Scotland. I'm like, okay, this is a great time to go for a hike and to break in these new shoes. And so I put these shoes on and strap on my backpack, stuff everything in there, and actually add some extra weight because I want to make sure it's heavy enough. So I'm planning and preparing and getting myself physically fit, making sure that I'm ready, and making sure that my shoes are broken in, the equipment is ready to go, and thinking this is a great opportunity. It's beautiful weather. Well, I didn't think about the fact that, what if my shoes aren't broken in very well yet? So about 5 miles out, as I'm getting to the end point and ready to turn around, I'm like, that shoe's not quite as comfy as I thought it might be. And I start doing one of these and start limping just a little bit and kind of taking some pressure off of the back of the heel. By the time I get back, okay, men, that competitive nature, or maybe just that tough, grit it out kind of thing, and you just kind of say, I'm going to bear through this and make it. I get back, by the time I take my shoe off and look at it, I got a blister that big. I'm like, that was maybe not the smartest choice. I will never claim to always make the smartest choices. But I'm like, darn, that didn't work so well. I hoped that I could keep the blister for a little while and not, it popped and broke and ripped the skin off completely, was totally raw under there. I'm like, that's good. But by Wednesday, I was like, this has got to be okay, and I need to get back out there and continue to break things. I'm like, I'll put a couple Band-Aids over this just right, and so that it won't rub, and I still have to break the shoes in. So about 4 miles out with this pack on, I'm like, yeah, maybe that still's not going to work. I'm not sure. And I turn around, and by the time I get back, I've got another blister underneath what was the blister that is now popped and bleeding, and everybody's like, what in the heck were you thinking? Well, just ask my wife. I don't think when it comes to that thing. Just bear through it and make it happen. But I got back, and I'm like, but this is for a good cause, right? I know I've got to break my shoes in, and I know this renewal is coming. I'm really excited about it. I know there's a cost involved. I'm going to make this happen. Well, Friday, I went again. Everybody's like, stupid. Maybe. But you know what? Actually, this time with the Band-Aid on, I came back without a blister. It's healed up and I don't have all the layers of skin back yet, but I survived the hike, and the shoe has broken itself, or my foot has broken the shoe maybe, and the shoe has broken my foot in the process. But I knew there was a cost to it. And the preparation, but let me tell you, I am glad that I did not wait until I got to Scotland to try that. You know, there's a cost in preparation for the joy. There's a cost that is a part of, in fact, planning for those kinds of things. And we know that the joy is there. We know that it talks about the salvation that is to come. And yet for a while we suffer. And the truth is, there are things in this life that we suffer through, things that we are not happy about, things that we wake up and we think, oh, just another one of those days. Oh, I've got to face this. Oh, I've got to go to work and this. And we just know that, and we have to endure it. And it feels like, ugh. It's part of the cost. But we know that the reward outweighs the cost. In fact, what I want to point out is it's more than that. That if you actually understand the cost of ownership, the cost of faith, as we go back and talk about doing good in all circumstances, doing good will sometimes get you in trouble because somebody else doesn't like it, like the Pharisees didn't like Jesus healing on the Sabbath. There was a cost even to Jesus doing the good, and yet doing the good also provided joy. Joy to the people that he was doing good for, joy to Christ, to the disciples. Serving humbly, there's a cost to it, but there's a joy in serving. When you are able to serve someone else, you receive a great abundance of joy in the process. Inviting all, although you might be uncomfortable, inviting your enemy or somebody that you don't like or somebody that you're not comfortable with, or all of a sudden you might realize that you actually love them. Sometimes inviting someone breaks down that barrier enough that all of a sudden you find the joy in that relationship that you never knew was there before. What I'm saying in this is the joy actually is not even at the end of the cost, but the joy is in the process of getting there. I can tell you, I might not have had a smile on my face as I was gritting my teeth with blisters, but I can tell you that I had in my mind the joy that was coming out of it. And I think that's, as Christians, that's what we should do, is keep in mind the joy that is a part of our faith, even in the midst of the cost. Second place where it talks about joy in this passage is in verse 8. And it says this in verse 8. It says, though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him, and you rejoice with a joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. You know, what that's talking about is you don't see Jesus right now. Right now, it'd be so much easier if you could come to a church and Jesus was standing up here, and Jesus was teaching and preaching and healing and doing miracles, and you're actually in the presence of the Savior. But what this is saying is that we endure, we're committed to faith, we're committed to the church, even though Jesus isn't the one they're preaching, even though Jesus isn't the one that we see on a daily basis when we wake up and Jesus says, by the way, you could pray right now before you start the day. No, our commitment is, even though we don't see Christ, even though we don't have the fulfillment of our faith yet, we're committed to see it through. I was thinking, Disney probably had no idea what he was starting when he started drawing Steamboat Willie. He had no idea what it would become. My father started a business, moved from Urbandale and up to Spirit Lake just before I was born, and started a business with his parents. And I wasn't there to see the beginning of it, but I know the story. My dad was looking for business to start the screw machine manufacturing, and he didn't have any machines. But he was committed. He knew what it would take. He went out and solicited jobs, and he got one. He received one that he had put a bid in for, but he didn't have any machines to make these parts with. He committed, gave himself fully to it, went out and purchased the machines that he needed, ran this first batch of parts, sold them, of course, didn't make near enough to pay for the machines. But he invested himself in the process, and it became a business. What was really neat about that business is I remember as a child the family that it was. That we would celebrate Christmas together as a business. All of the employees, all of their families. And I remember how it impacted people, how it made a difference in their lives. I remember how it touched others. And they knew that they could always go to my family for not just financial support, but spiritual support, for care in the lives of their family, no matter what it was going on. That's commitment. And the other thing that I want to say is there's joy in commitment, not just waiting until, hey, we've got these machines paid off. There's joy there. Well, that is an achievement, but there's joy in committing. There's joy in going out and making that initial investment, knowing that you're not there yet, knowing that you're not face to face with Jesus. We can still have joy in the journey. If I bring this back to that article that I shared at the very beginning, the primary points that he talked about as joy of business ownership. Let me put this in perspective. Building a team and maturing, he says. And I look around at the church, and I'm amazed. It takes 12 to 15 people every service, Saturday night, every Sunday morning, just to make worship happen. To set up, to tear down, to run things, to lead worship, to take care of the kids in the H2Go. It's a team of people who've come together, wrapped their arms around each other and said, we're going to do this. It's a team of leaders who are being raised up. We've got two people, actually, one in seminary, one headed to seminary this fall. We've got people who are in school for lay ministry who are helping lead church here, even at New Hope. We've got people who are developing in connectional ministry, in connecting with the school and connecting with our community and the police officers, and we're doing something that is developing a team and watching people mature in their faith. I'm watching people lead Bible studies. I'm watching people get involved and thinking that is a joy of business. That's actually a joy of the church. He says milestones, celebrating those milestones and those wins along the way. You know what? I look back and I think to myself, okay, 5, 6 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed where we're at. I wouldn't have guessed what we were doing. I could have had this vision or that vision, but I can tell you what I've seen, the milestones along the way, from starting a Saturday service, which tends to be full, and Sunday service, and H2Go program, connectional ministry with the youth that we've just started at 8 other churches, the ways that we're engaged in our community and serving locally and even in the school. I would not have guessed all those things. The fact that we're financially supported, completely funded on our own, not on grants anymore, that is amazing to me. The fact that we claim our mission statement, the fact that I see in your lives people who are being Christ in community every day. That's claiming the victory, claiming the wins along the way. He says being responsible to each other, being responsible to the community and to the conference. I think that we are that. We hold each other up, and in small groups we pray for each other, and we're there in every moment of life with each other, and that's responsibility to each other and with each other. Setting our own limits. You know, it's one thing that I love about this kind of setting. Same thing at Hopkins Grove. You know, they just run with something, but it's true here also. We have a dream, or we have something we want to try, or a new kind of small group, a new style of twisting things around for worship, and we make it happen. A way to reach out into the community or to work alongside businesses. A year from now, we've already got planned, we're going to be hosting a work as worship event for the whole community, for business owners, for the chamber, and we're doing that already. I mean, these are things that we're living into, and it's actually a national televised event. Live streamed event, I better say that right. Those kinds of things that I see happening. Creating employment, you know, again, I mentioned, I see the way we support each other. Like my dad's business growing up, the way we wrap our arms around each other, the way we care for each other, the way we offer hope and encouragement to people who don't have it anywhere else. People who are hiding afraid in their own home because they don't know how they're going to be treated outside their own doors. Ownership. We're talking about ownership. The joy of ownership is this. The joy comes as we claim the cost. The joy comes as we claim the commitment and the perseverance. The joy is something that happens along the way. It's different than happiness. It doesn't depend on a circumstance. It doesn't depend on everything going right in your life. Joy is something that flows from within because we chose to do good even though others didn't like it, because we chose to serve humbly even though we would like a little recognition, because we chose to invite all even though they look different and might be uncomfortable to us. It's because we chose to persevere rather than give up. That's where the joy comes. And I can imagine the disciples thinking the same thing after Jesus left. Well, what do we do now? They found out the only way to have joy is to complete the mission that Christ has sent them on. I'll tell you today, joy is the result of Christian faith, of Christian love, and Christian service. So today I invite you into that space. I invite you into that opportunity of being an owner, owning your personal faith, owning the church, and having enough courage to invest yourself in it, claiming the cost and claiming the commitment and receiving the joy. Would you pray with me?